My mom told my son to work hard or he'd end up like me. For years, I had endured her insults, but when she dragged my son into it, I finally snapped. Months later, she still said I was overreacting. I don't know what kind of man my mother thought I was going to become, but I'm sure not the one she likes to see I am now. I'm 37, and I've spent the better part of the last decade trying to keep the peace between my mother and my little family, my wife Melissa, and our son Jacob. I always figured she meant well, even when she made her jabs. I told myself it was just her way. That whole generation has sharp tongues, right? That's what I used to say. That's what I wanted to believe. But what happened at Jacob's 10th birthday party? That was the last straw. The moment something in me finally snapped into focus. Growing up, my mother was the kind of woman who saw every conversation as a battlefield and every compliment as a negotiation. She didn't praise unless it cost her nothing, and even then she'd lace it with some backhanded insult. If I got a B, she asked why it wasn't an A. If I got an A, she said, well, it's about time. My dad passed when I was in high school, sudden heart attack. Gone before the ambulance even showed up. After that, she doubled down on controlling everything, and I was the good son. I followed the rules. I didn't rebel. I stayed close, helped with errands, even moved back in for a while after college when she needed help around the house. But as I got older, I started seeing how much of my life I'd let her dictate. She never approved of Melissa, called her pushy just because she spoke up for herself. She once told me straight-faced that marrying Melissa was the second worst decision I ever made. The first being not going to law school. I'm in construction. I run a small contracting business that's kept a roof over our heads and food on the table for years. But to her, that wasn't enough. We kept her at a distance once Jacob was born. Not completely. I still felt this nagging sense of obligation, this guilt she somehow hardwired into me. I didn't want to deprive my son of a grandmother, but we never left him alone with her. There was just something off. Every visit ended with some comment that lingered. He's a picky eater just like his father was. Always gave me a hard time. Or, let's hope he gets Melissa's smarts, not your stubbornness. I brushed it off. Melissa didn't. She started pulling back more and more. I could see it. The way she tensed up before every family dinner, how she'd go quiet in the car ride home. One night she asked me, why do you keep letting her treat you like this? And I didn't have an answer that made sense. I think part of me just wanted my mom to like me. To say finally, without qualification, that she was proud of me. We decided to throw Jacob's birthday party at the park this year. He loves the playground there. There's this big wooden ship structure he and his friends call the Pirate Zone. We rented out the picnic area, brought in balloons, snacks, pizza, even one of those folding tables covered in superhero tablecloths. Melissa went all out on the cake, 3 tiers, hand-decorated with Marvel characters. Because Jacob's in that phase where every sentence starts with, "Did you know Spider-Man?" It was a good day, a warm sunny afternoon full of laughter and sticky fingers and juice boxes. For once, I thought we'd actually pulled off a peaceful gathering. My mom showed up late, no surprise there, wearing this huge sun hat like she was making a red carpet entrance. She kissed Jacob on the cheek, handed him a gift card in an envelope, no card, just an envelope, and gave Melissa one of her infamous once-overs. Then she turned to me, smiled and said, "Well, it looks like you didn't mess this up too badly." I laughed it off. Jacob didn't even notice. He was halfway up the slide. And for the next hour or so, things were fine. The kids were playing, the adults were chatting, Melissa and I were tag-teaming cleanup and cake duty. And then right as Jacob sat down to open his presents, it happened. She leaned down right next to him, cupped her hand gently on his shoulder, like she was about to whisper something sweet, and said loud enough for me and several others to hear, "Study hard, sweetie. Don't end up like your father." Just like that. No hesitation, no wink, no laugh, dead serious. I froze. I wasn't even holding anything, but I swear my hands went numb. Jacob looked confused. He furrowed his brows and glanced up at me like he wasn't sure what she meant. Melissa dropped the paper plate she was carrying. My cousin Dave, who was standing nearby, gave this awkward cough and looked away. For a split second I thought maybe I misheard, but I knew I didn't. My mom just stood there patting Jacob's back like she'd said something sweet, like she was the loving grandma imparting wisdom, like she hadn't just taken a shot at me in front of my son. My 10-year-old son. I didn't shout, I didn't make a scene, I just walked over, calmly took Jacob's hand and said, "Hey buddy, we're heading out." He looked confused, but didn't resist. Melissa was already packing up the rest of the gifts. I turned to the guests and said, "Thanks for coming everyone, we're cutting the party short." My mom blinked, surprised. "Wait, what? What's going on?" I looked her dead in the eyes and said, You're not going to talk to my son like that. And you're not going to see him again. Not if this is the kind of poison you bring into his life. She laughed. Actually laughed. Oh, don't be so sensitive. It was just a joke. Kevin, come on. But I was already walking away. And that was the last moment she saw her grandson, at least for now. It's been 2 weeks. She's called every day since, sometimes twice. Left voicemails, some apologetic, most defensive. You're overreacting, she says. I was kidding. You're depriving Jacob of a grandmother over one comment. But it wasn't just one. It never is. It's a pattern, a slow, constant drip of contempt disguised as concern. And I'm done. I haven't picked up a single one of her calls. But now she's escalating. She reached out to my aunt, to my cousin, even tried to message Melissa directly. And I have a sinking feeling this isn't over. Not by a long shot. The thing about people like my mother is they don't take no for an answer. Not because they can't, but because they believe they're entitled to yes. And when they're told no when you put up a boundary they didn't approve of, they don't pause to self-reflect. They retaliate. The calls didn't stop. Neither did the texts. She started long-winded voicemails that played out like monologues from some old soap opera. Kevin, I'm your mother, she'd say. You don't just cut me off like some stranger at a store. I raised you. Then there were the guilt trips laced with religious tones she never cared for when I was growing up. God commands forgiveness. Or, the Bible says, honor thy parents. It was like she had a script ready for every excuse. But I stayed silent. Melissa, though, was not. About a week after the party, she answered one of the calls. I didn't know until I heard her voice in the living room. Not shouting, but firm. Steel behind velvet. No, you don't get to decide when you've crossed the line, she said. You humiliated my husband in front of our son. That's not a misunderstanding. That's cruelty. You don't get access to Jacob unless you learn how to respect the people raising him. I stood in the hallway holding Jacob's laundry and listened. Melissa didn't raise her voice once, but there was this power in her words I don't think even I had fully appreciated. My wife had spent years absorbing the slights, the digs, the tension, and now she was done carrying the weight of my loyalty to a woman who'd never given either of us a sliver of hers. When she hung up, I didn't say anything. I just set the laundry down, walked over, and hugged her. We didn't need to talk about it. We were on the same page. For a moment, I thought maybe that was it. That my mom would finally get the message and give us space. That maybe, just maybe, she'd reflect on her behavior and reach out in a meaningful way. A real apology, not a rehearsed line. I even had this daydream where she showed up at our door with a handwritten letter and tears in her eyes. But that's not who she is. Instead, she doubled down. She went nuclear. It started small, a passive-aggressive Facebook post. Some people forget who changed their diapers, vague enough to give her plausible deniability. But then came the more direct ones, sharing old photos of Jacob with captions like, "So many memories before I became toxic." Friends and distant relatives commented things like, "You're such a good grandma." And kids today have no respect. Some even messaged me privately to ask what was going on. I didn't respond. Then she began using others to reach us. My Aunt Carla called one night, her voice already exasperated before I could say hello. "Kevin, please just talk to your mother," she sighed. "She's been calling everyone. She's heartbroken." "She's not heartbroken," I said flatly. "She's cornered. That's different." Carla was silent for a second. She made a mistake. A comment. "You're going to keep Jacob away over a joke. It wasn't a joke," I said, "and it wasn't the first. It's just the last." After that, Carla didn't call again. The tension rippled outward. My cousin Dave, the one who'd heard the comment at the party, texted me to say, "For what it's worth, I heard what she said. You weren't wrong to leave." That meant more than I expected it to. But then came the real betrayal. It was the following Saturday, one of those slow, rainy weekends, where we were all lounging around the house in pajamas. Jacob was building a Lego set in the living room, while Melissa and I were sorting bills at the dining table. The doorbell rang and we both froze. Not many people showed up unannounced anymore. Melissa peeked through the window and shot me a look. The kind of look that says, "You're not going to like this." It was my mother standing on the porch, soaked to the bone, under a dripping umbrella, holding a gift bag and wearing that practiced look of concerned sadness. "I'll handle it," I said. I stepped out, closing the door behind me. The rain was cold and relentless, and she looked smaller than usual under the weight of it, but I didn't let that sway me. "You need to leave," I said quietly. "Kevin, Please, she said, voice trembling. I just want to see him. I brought him something. It's nothing fancy, just a little game he likes. He doesn't need gifts. He needs peace, and he has that now. She took a step closer. I'm sorry, okay? I'm sorry if it came out wrong. I didn't mean it. I was just trying to motivate him. No, I said. You were trying to insult me in front of him. You wanted to make sure your opinion of me was the one he remembered that day. She blinked rapidly, then shoved the gift bag into my hands. I raised you. I know what's best for you. You raised me, I said, cutting her off. And I'm still undoing some of the damage. I will not let you start fresh on him. I handed the gift back and stepped inside. She stood there for a moment stunned, then slowly turned and walked away. I wish that had been the end of it, but what came next, that was when the line turned from emotional manipulation to something else entirely. Monday morning, Jacob didn't show up to school because someone called the school pretending to be Melissa and said he'd be absent all week for a family emergency. The office staff called us to confirm. They were confused. Melissa was livid. Who would do that? She asked, eyes wide. I didn't even need to guess. That evening, I checked the security footage on our front door camera from earlier in the week. Sure enough, there she was, my mother, trying to drop off a package late at night, hovering near the door like she was afraid to be seen. Inside the package, a letter addressed to Jacob. It said, "Don't believe everything your parents say. Grandma will always love you no matter what lies they tell you about me." I stared at that line until the words stopped making sense. That was the breaking point. This wasn't just about me anymore. She was now actively trying to wedge herself between us and our son, undermining us as parents, confusing him, turning her need for control into a campaign. And something inside me, that quiet voice that had always made excuses for her, always whispered she means well, went silent. There was no going back after this. Not for her, not for us. But what she didn't know, what she never anticipated, was that I had been preparing for this moment for longer than she realized. And if she thought I was the same obedient son she used to scold into silence, she was about to learn just how much I had changed. The day we read the letter she wrote to Jacob, something shifted in our home. Melissa stood over the kitchen sink, gripping the paper like it had personally insulted her, and I guess in a way it had. Her hands trembled, not with fear, but with the kind of quiet rage that only a mother protecting her child could carry. I sat at the dining table staring at the letter, the words seared into my brain. I kept replaying that single line, "Don't believe everything your parents say." It was a dagger, a deliberate one. I felt sick, physically nauseous, not just because of what she wrote, but because of what it meant. She had crossed a line I never thought she'd dare approach. I had spent my life telling myself she was just difficult, just old-fashioned, just blunt. But the truth was uglier. My mother wasn't just anything. She was manipulative, calculated, and now she was targeting my son. Melissa said we needed to draw a hard boundary, not a suggestion, not a pause, a wall, solid, permanent. This isn't about us anymore, she said. This is about protecting Jacob. And she was right. But that didn't make it easy. The next few days were a blur of tension. Jacob didn't know the full extent of what had happened, but he picked up on the atmosphere. He started asking quiet questions like, "Did Grandma get mad at me, and did I do something wrong?" We reassured him, told him he did nothing wrong, that he was safe, that sometimes adults make choices that aren't healthy, and that's why we have to make changes. But explaining estrangement to a 10-year-old without feeding bitterness into him, that's a needle I wasn't sure how to thread. And then came the guilt, not from Melissa, not from Jacob, but from me. It hit me hard in the chest, like a weight I didn't know I'd been holding, finally dropped and cracked something inside. For so long, I'd minimized the damage not just to myself, but to my family. I kept telling myself it wasn't that bad, that I was doing the right thing by staying connected, but all I'd done was leave the back door open for poison to drift in. I wasn't protecting my son, I was trying to keep my mother happy, and I'd failed them both. I started having trouble sleeping, not insomnia exactly, but the kind of restless, empty feeling that kept me staring at the ceiling for hours while Melissa slept beside me. Some nights, I'd get up and just sit on the porch with a blanket wrapped around me and a cup of tea going cold in my hands. I kept asking myself what kind of man I was, not just as a father, but as a son. Was I cruel for cutting her off? Was I weak for waiting so long? I felt like a rope being tugged in opposite directions. Loyalty versus responsibility, guilt versus conviction. Work didn't help. I run a small contracting business, mostly local jobs, Home remodels, kitchen renovations, that kind of thing. Normally, it's my escape. My hands know what they're doing even when my brain is scrambled. But lately, even that rhythm was off. I'd forget materials, mix up timelines. My crew, most of them longtime friends, noticed. One of them, Jordan, pulled me aside one afternoon while we were laying down tile and said, "Hey man, whatever's eating you, it's showing. You okay?" I almost lied. Almost said I was just tired. But instead I told him not everything but enough. He didn't say much, just nodded. Let me talk. When I was done, he said, "You know, we spend our whole lives thinking parents are these giants like they're carved in stone. But sometimes they're just people. People who mess up. And we got to decide if we want their mess bleeding into our own lives." That stuck with me. It was a week later when I hit bottom. I came home late from a job where the client had been particularly demanding, over budget, behind schedule, and asking if we could repaint the entire basement again because she changed her mind about the vibe. I walked in the front door and found Jacob crying on the stairs, clutching a small drawing he'd made for school. It was crumpled. I asked what happened. Apparently, one of his classmates had brought up grandparents who visited them, who sent gifts, who came to school events. Jacob had said, "My grandma doesn't see me anymore." And another kid said, "Maybe you were bad." Kids can be cruel without knowing it, but still, it shattered him. And when I knelt down to hug him, I felt this overwhelming wave of shame, because no matter how justified my choices were, the fallout had landed on him. That night after he went to sleep, I broke down in front of Melissa fully, not just tears sobbing, the kind where your whole body shudders. And I said the words I didn't want to admit: "I feel like I'm ruining him." She sat beside me on the couch, held my hand, and said something that still echoes in my bones. "You're saving him." And that was the turning point. I woke up the next day with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. Not peace, not yet, but a sense of direction. I started small. I took a few days off work and planned an entire weekend around Jacob. No distractions, just father-son time. We built a birdhouse, went to the local arcade, made a mess, baking cookies, and stayed up watching Spider-Man movies until he fell asleep halfway through the second one. And in those moments, something started to heal, not just in him, but in me. After that, I made a decision. If I was going to truly protect him and build the life I wanted without my mother's shadow, I had to stop waiting for her to change. I had to stop hoping for closure. I had to create it myself. I started therapy. That felt like admitting defeat at first, but it quickly became one of the best decisions I've ever made. Talking to someone who didn't know my mother, who wasn't emotionally tangled in the web, who could name the patterns for what they were: manipulation, enmeshment, emotional gaslighting. It gave me language, and with language came power. I started untangling years of guilt and self-blame. Started recognizing the ways I'd bent over backward to earn love that should have been unconditional. And most importantly, I started seeing myself not as a failed son, but as a good father. Melissa joined me for a few sessions, not because she needed help, but because we needed it. She told the therapist things I hadn't known she carried, about how hard it was watching me let my mother needle me, how helpless she felt trying to protect both me and Jacob. She cried once, not out of pain, but relief that I was finally drawing the line. Professionally, things began to shift too. Jordan, the guy who gave me that speech on the job site, surprised me one day with a proposal. He wanted to invest in the business, said he believed in what we were building, but more than that, he believed in me. With his support, we expanded our operations, took on bigger jobs, hired an office manager so I could focus less on chasing down invoices and more on doing the work I loved. The business grew, slowly, steadily, and for the first time, I didn't feel like I was just surviving. We even signed a contract to renovate the town's old community center, a legacy project, they called it. I was proud not just for me, but for the version of Jacob who'd one day walk past that building and say, "My dad worked on that." At home, things stabilized. Jacob bounced back. Kids are resilient. He still asked about grandma sometimes, but the questions got softer, less confused. We answered honestly in age-appropriate ways, told him that some people hurt others without meaning to, and that it's okay to take space from people who don't treat us with kindness. He nodded, like he understood more than we gave him credit for. But even as our life started to rebuild, I knew it wasn't over because my mother hadn't let go. And while I'd found clarity, healing, and a newfound strength in myself, I could feel something coming, a final push, a desperate act, and I was right. In the weeks following the letter, something inside me hardened. Not in a bitter way, I wasn't spiraling into hate, but with a kind of focused resolve I'd never felt before. I had protected my son, I had stood firm beside my wife, and now I was rebuilding. Slowly, yes, but intentionally. And that gave me something my mother never anticipated: leverage. Because while she thought she'd worn me down, what she'd really done was give me clarity. I didn't know what she'd do next, but I knew something was coming. Her silence wasn't silence, it was plotting. My mother wasn't the kind to retreat. She was the kind to reload. So I started paying attention. The first clue came from my Aunt Carla again. She'd gone quiet for a few weeks after our last conversation, but I got a message from her one Sunday afternoon, just a text with a screenshot. My mother had posted a long public status on Facebook dripping in faux concern, saying how some children are so ungrateful they keep their own child from knowing the warmth of a grandmother's love, and how it breaks my heart that lies and bitterness can destroy a family. It had hundreds of likes and dozens of comments, people I'd barely remembered from my childhood, chiming in with things like, "So sorry you're going through this." And kids these days have no respect. A few names I recognized from Melissa's side of the family too. Church people, old coworkers, distant cousins. Some of them had shared it. I stared at that post for a long time, not because I was surprised, but because it confirmed what I had suspected. She was laying the groundwork. She was painting herself as the victim. Not to me, but to everyone else. And once she had enough sympathy, she'd act. Melissa saw the post too. She looked at me and said, "She's getting desperate." I nodded, which means she's going to get sloppy. So I started documenting everything: every text, every voicemail, every Facebook post, screenshot by screenshot, every email. Yes, she started emailing Jacob's school, pretending to be me again, trying to confirm appointments and access. I printed it all. I created a file on my computer and a backup folder on an external drive. Melissa, being smarter than me in this department, created a secure cloud folder and added timestamps, file names, even metadata. She said, if this turns into something bigger, we need to take every step in writing. And then I called a lawyer. Not to sue her, not yet, but to ask questions to understand our rights as parents, to figure out what protections existed legally, to make sure she couldn't show up at school or attempt contact through third parties. The lawyer, a woman named Dana, listened carefully. She didn't judge. In fact, she seemed oddly unsurprised. When I finished explaining, she said, "You're not the first client to deal with a parent like this." That stung a bit. She told me that while grandparents' rights exist in some states, they don't override parental rights without a custody claim or proof of abandonment, neither of which applied here. "She's trying to guilt you into submission," Dana said. "Don't let the narrative become hers." I left that office with two things: a notarized letter revoking consent for my mother to pick up Jacob from school under any circumstance, and a list of steps we could take if she escalated further, including a cease and desist or even a restraining order. It felt strange preparing legal defenses against my own mother, but when someone's behavior endangers your child's peace of mind, biology becomes irrelevant. And now that I was armed with fact support and documentation, I no longer felt trapped. I felt in control. The second part of my plan came from somewhere less expected. My cousin Dave, the one who'd witnessed the birthday comment, reached out again. We met for coffee. He seemed uncomfortable at first, but then he leaned in and said, "Listen, she's been calling around asking questions about you, saying things like, 'Do you know if Kevin's struggling financially? Or has he said anything about Melissa leaving him?'" He paused, gave me a look. "She's trying to stir up a story. I think she's hoping if she tells enough people you're falling apart, someone will believe it." I didn't even blink. "Thanks for the heads up." "She asked me to dinner," he added. "Wanted to talk about how the family dynamic is changing." I said I was busy. That meant more than he knew. Dave had always been neutral, for him to take a side that said something. And then came the opportunity. Melissa's friend Karen. Yes, that's really her name, but the good kind of Karen worked at a nonprofit that hosted a yearly fundraiser, a gala dinner, community awards, spotlighting local businesses that had given back. Karen told us they were nominating my construction company for a spotlight feature. "You've done work for free on 3 homes this year for families in need," she said. "Don't act like that's not a big deal." At first, I was reluctant. I'm not the suit and speech type. But Melissa nudged me. "Let people see you," she said. "Let her see you thrive." So I accepted, and then I had an idea. If my mother wanted to weaponize public opinion against me, I'd beat her at her own game, not through lies, but through transparency. I didn't make a speech that night, but the event had a video segment, a 5-minute piece on each business they featured. Karen asked if I'd be willing to talk about why I started the company and what our mission was. I agreed, but with one condition: I wanted to write my own narration. I stayed up late working on that script. And when it aired at the gala, this is what people heard over footage of my team working on homes, laughing with families hammering and painting and measuring in the summer heat. My name is Kevin, and I started this business with two things in mind: dignity and legacy. I didn't grow up in a home where kindness came easy. I spent a long time believing love had to be earned through obedience. But when I became a father, I realized the kind of man I wanted my son to see. Not someone afraid of confrontation, but someone who stood for peace, for respect, for doing the right thing, even when it cost you. This business isn't just drywall and nails. It's rebuilding homes the way I'm learning to rebuild myself, brick by brick, with purpose. The room went silent. People stood up. Melissa squeezed my hand. And somewhere out there, I knew my mother saw it. Whether through someone else's social media or through one of the people she tried to poison against me, it would get back to her. She'd hear my voice. She'd hear me reclaiming the narrative she tried to destroy, and she would realize she was losing. But that wasn't enough, not yet. Because what she did next was worse than anything I expected, and it gave me the final reason I needed to strike back calmly, legally, and with finality. It was a Thursday afternoon when I got the email that confirmed everything I'd suspected and pushed me past the final point of no return. Jacob's school administrator reached out politely, requesting a meeting to review an urgent concern. Melissa and I showed up together. We were led into a small office and handed a copy of a printed email. It was from my mother. She had created a fake Gmail account, something like concerned_grandma245@gmail.com, and emailed the school board directly. The message was long, dripping with passive-aggressive phrasing, but the core accusation was clear. She claimed Melissa and I were emotionally neglecting Jacob, that we had isolated him from all family members, and that he had become withdrawn, sad, and fearful. She suggested a home welfare check. She even offered to take temporary custody if needed. My stomach dropped. My pulse didn't. I stayed calm. I had prepared for this. The administrator looked uncomfortable. "We're obligated to follow up on concerns like this," she said. "But we've seen nothing to support it. Jacob is thriving here. He's bright, polite, engaged. We don't want to intrude, but you need to know someone's trying to escalate this." Melissa was shaking, not visibly, but I could feel it through her hand in mine. I thanked the administrator, promised to follow up, and left with a folder full of printed emails, including the fake address and the headers showing its origin. We got home, sat Jacob down, and gently reminded him that if anyone ever tried to ask him questions about our home or made him feel uncomfortable, he could always come to us. He nodded. He wasn't scared, not really, but Melissa was. I was. Because this was no longer a family spat. This was a campaign, a cold, organized smear campaign from someone who had lost control and wanted to claw it back any way she could. And it was time I ended it once and for all. I reached back out to Dana, our lawyer. I gave her the new evidence, the fake email, the school's notes, everything I'd collected. She took one look and said, "It's time." She filed a cease and desist letter, formally written, delivered via certified mail, and logged with a local court. In it, we made clear that any further attempts to contact us, our son, or third parties in ways that could damage our family's reputation, stability, or well-being would result in a restraining order and a defamation suit. But that wasn't all. Remember the gala? A few weeks after the video aired, a local newspaper ran a story about it. Community impact business owners who give back, that kind of thing. They quoted my narration from the video. A few online outlets picked it up, and right in the middle of that momentum, I made my move. I wrote a public letter, not on Facebook, not on Instagram, on LinkedIn. I knew it was where a lot of mutual acquaintances, community members, and even former clients of my mother's connected. She'd been a private piano teacher for decades, taught half the neighborhood, had a pristine public image. In the post, I didn't name her. I didn't even hint at her identity. But I told the story. I wrote about the pain of growing up under emotional manipulation, about being gaslit, guilt, and diminished, about trying to maintain a relationship with a toxic parent, and realizing eventually that you don't owe people access to your life just because you share DNA. I spoke about the impact it had on my marriage, my confidence, my mental health, and how becoming a father forced me to reckon with what I'd accepted as normal. I ended the post with this: healing isn't about pretending the damage didn't happen. It's about protecting the next generation from it. My son may never know the full story, but he'll know what peace feels like. He'll know love without strings. And one day when he's grown, he'll look back at the choices I made and see a man who broke the cycle. The post went viral, not in a TikTok dancing kind of way, but in a quietly devastating way. Comments flooded in from old friends, former students, neighbors who had stories of their own, even people I didn't know sharing how they too had cut off family for their own peace. Melissa cried reading the comments. I did too. But the final blow came 2 days later. I got a call from one of her oldest friends, a retired music teacher named Elaine. "I just thought you should know," she said, voice low. "Your mother's been calling people trying to defend herself. She's saying your post was about her, that she's being slandered." I paused. "Did she deny writing the email to the school?" Elaine laughed bitterly. "She denied everything, but no one believed her. She's panicking. She never thought you'd speak." I thanked her, hung up, then closed my eyes. That was it. She had always relied on silence. Shame the fact that I wouldn't speak up, that I wouldn't fight back because it would be disrespectful or too dramatic or not worth the trouble. But I had found my voice, and more importantly, people were listening. She tried once more, just one more attempt. A letter in the mail, handwritten, no return address, but unmistakably hers. It wasn't even an apology. It was a guilt bomb full of phrases like, "I never thought my own son would humiliate me, and after all, I sacrificed for you." At the bottom, a line written in shaky cursive, "I suppose this is goodbye." She was right. I didn't respond. I filed the letter with the others and sent one final update to Dana. Then I moved on. Jacob is thriving. He just started 5th grade, built a treehouse with me over the summer. He calls it Fort Peace. Melissa's business, an Etsy shop for custom home decor, has exploded since the gala exposure. And me. I wake up every morning without that familiar weight in my chest. We still talk about her sometimes, but less and less. Jacob asks fewer questions. I don't know if he fully remembers what she did. I hope he doesn't. I hope his memories fade into fuzziness, replaced by ones of safety and warmth. But me? I'll remember, not out of bitterness, but out of pride, because I did the hardest thing a son can do. I stood between my child and the pain I'd known, and I didn't flinch. That is my legacy, and that is how the cycle ends. I didn't protect her reputation. I protected my son's childhood.